but I don't sing, so.
Okay, you're good.
I'm good? Okay, thank you. Okay.
Hello?
Okay. All right, so after last week's class, and I realized that I could either literally go wide or go long, I decided to kind of take a step back, and we've been... What? Thank you, but I probably am just gonna spew at this point. I decided to, take a step back in the interest of getting to a little bit of a sense of closure of Yaakov and Sons, because as is my usual, I completely overestimated, underestimated, whatever. I prepared way too much. And, number one, forgetting that it was a 5-week course, and number two, because in my brain, which is why I was the kid who cried before she had to write an essay, because in my mind, an essay had to, number one, appear in the New Yorker, and number two, be like 40 pages long. So, that's just how my brain works since I've been in high school. But what I decided what I wanted to do is that now that we've spent time looking at Yaakov and at his wives and at the dynamic and at Ruvain and kind of the beginning of the family, what I would actually like to do is to take Reuven, Shimon and Levi, Yehuda, and Yosef and kind of trace them through. Alex Israel from Yeshivat Har Etzion wrote a really wonderful book on Sefer Melachim, on the Book of Kings, where he does, this is, not a novel idea, where he basically traces the Yosef line and the Yehuda line, because that's what happens, is that line, the kingdom splits after Shlomo dies. The kingdom splits into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom is really the kingdom of Yosef. The main tribe is Ephraim, and it's often referred to as Ephraim in Nevi'im Achronim. And then the southern kingdom is obviously Yehuda. And then, he traces this forwards and backwards in terms of, what we're doing. So I thought to myself that let's literally take a very quick walk through Chumash, forget about Navi, and see how this evolves and plays out. And I actually found some very interesting and things that I don't yet have answers for, which is where I'm going to kind of leave you at the end, all right? So I want to continue with the Ruvain piece of it. So I would ask you to please open up your Tanachim to Perek Lamed Zayin, Pasuk, I teach this to the freshmen. So Perek Lamed Zayin, chapter 37, verse, I'm going to say 19. Take a shot. Okay. So we're now in Perek Lamed Zayin, is where Yosef comes to the fore, right? And we know the story of Yosef is the, yeah, 37? Yes. Yeah, 19. So Yosef is the favored child because he is the child of Rachel that doesn't cost Rachel her life. I think we talked about Binyamin, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? Yeah, we talked about the name changing, that whole thing. So Yosef is the favored child for reasons that are both understandable but also tragic. That he, kind of puts onto Yosef all of the love that he had for Rachel, all of the longing that he had for Rachel, but also in fairness to Yaakov, he recognized, whether prophetically or just intuitively, what this child was destined to become, right? And he was right? What he saw for Yosef, and, Steven Spielberg aside, miracle child, whatever, but it's clear from the Midrashim that Yaakov saw something in Yosef that was kind of larger than life, and he nurtured that. gives him a coat of many different colors, or it's actually stripes, which was the equivalent of, like, I don't know, a Ferrari or something really expensive and really out there. The brothers were not too thrilled about it, but to be fair to the brothers, if you go back, actually keep your finger on your tet and go back to Pasuk Daled, the brothers, it says in the Pasuk, V'lo yachlu ledaber oto shalom, that they couldn't speak with him peaceably. And Rashi there is very quick to point out that mitoch genutan lomdiv shivcham, from their discredit we learn their praise, that on the one hand they couldn't talk to him, but on the other hand they weren't hypocrites. Like, everything was out on the table. Yosef knew that the brothers really didn't like him very much. The brothers knew that Yosef knew, and it was kind of this uneasy truce at this point. And the Midrashim are a little bit divided about whether there was animosity that was only because of Yaakov. In other words, they were kind of like all victims of this, or whether Yosef himself played into this. There's one opinion that's brought down that Yaakov, the Ramban says this, that Yaakov delegated the Bnei Bilha and Bnei Zilpah, the children of the maidservants, to babysit Yosef, and they resented it. But on the other hand, another midrash, which Rashi brings down, says that Yosef actually was very kind to the Bnei Hashvachot, the children of Bilha and Zilpah, and defended them against Bnei Leah, who bullied them. Like, yeah, who do you think you are? You're just the children of the maidservants of the concubines, and we're the head wife's children. So it's a little bit unclear, but it was definitely the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And Yosef doesn't help because he tattles on them. That the text in Pasuk Bet says very clearly, Vayaveh dibatam ra'a el avihem, that he and who he's tattling on is also clear, but he is a tattletale. It's bad. It's bad, but up until Pasuk Daled, we have this kind of uneasy truce. Then Yosef has his dreams. And again, the Mefarshim and Yaakov is torn, because the brothers and Yaakov recognize that these are not just random, stretches of the imagination. Yosef tells them, he tells them even when they get annoyed with him, whether he's clueless, whether he's arrogant, whether he's seeking validation, whether he is so focused on God's word, you can pick A, B, C, or D, and you would be defensible in terms of the text. Okay? So, and psychologically, any of those make sense. But whatever it is, he tells the dreams to the brothers, and the first thing that comes out of the brothers' mouths is, do you think you are going to rule over us? They get it. There's no question. They get what this dream means. They get, and I actually love the line in Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat where the brothers sing the line, at least we hope it won't come true. Maybe he was right all along. Right? That's because that's a possible way of reading it, that they themselves sense it. He then tells his father gets angry at him, and several of the commentaries say there that his father gets angry at him in an attempt to deflect the animosity amongst the brothers, right? That the father, because then in Pasuk Yud Aleph, I think it says, Ve'aviv shamar et hadabar, and his father kept the whole thing in mind. But by the time we get to Pasuk Yud Bet, by the time we get to verse 12 in chapter 37, things are bad. So the brothers go off, they get, cool down, cool off, and Yaakov decides to send Yosef after them. And again, whether it's because Yaakov was clueless, whether Yaakov was making a last-ditch attempt to have his sons work things out, because Yaakov believed so deeply in God and in Yosef, and in this sense that Yosef was destined for something bigger, that he truly believed that Yosef would not be harmed. But when we get to verse 19, we now see this is that moment of Yosef and his brothers. Okay, so verse 19, it's in verse 19 or verse 18, where they say, and they saw him from a distance. What pasuk is that? Yudchet. Okay. All right. So can you read the pasuk, please?
Yes. ויראו אותו מרחוק, ובטרם יקרב אליהם, ויתנפלו אותו להמיתו. ויאמרו איש אל אחיו, הנה בעל החלומות על הזה בא.
Okay. So we see this scene of they see him from a distance, and you can either say that this was a physical distance, which is pshat, right? The simple meaning of the text, right? They're like up on a hill and they see him. There are lots of hills and valleys, and they see him coming down the road. Or you can also see it in a more homiletic sense. They see him at a distance. In other words, what brother would think of fratricide? There has to be some, like, really psychic difference between them, right? Psychologically, they see him from a distance. That he's far removed from them. He's not part of them. Vayitnaklu, they plot. That's what little nikalim are plans and plots and twists. And then it says, Vayomer ish elachav. And a man said to his brother. Now again, pshat is they're all talking to each other. It would be as if, you said something to you, and Fern said something to Marsha, and, that's the pshat. But Rashi there jumps in and quotes the Midrash, and he says that this Ish and Achiv are Shimon and Levi. And Shimon, the reason he says that it's Shimon and Levi is twofold. Number one, Ish el Achiv, a man to his brother. When Yaakov, at the end of his life, talks to the brothers, he says, Shimon v'Levi Achim, right? Mm-hmm. They're referred as these Siamese twins, practically, or conjoined twins, or whatever you want to call them, Tweedledee and Tweedledum. The other thing is that Shimon and Levi at this point have a history of violence, right? So if you go back to Perek Lamed Daled, chapter 34, we have this story of Dinah. It's a very bloody, very difficult story. I skip it very intentionally because I don't want to deal with it in the 9th grade. But in any case, Shimon and Levi, their sister, their full-blood sister, Dinah, goes out and she is seduced / raped / kidnapped / question mark, okay? And by the way, all of those slashes are in the Midrash and in the Gemara. I'm not reading into the text. If you look at the text, it's really unclear. When it says that he took her, did he persuade her? Did he seduce her? Did he rape her? It's really not so clear. But what is clear is that Shimon and Levi see that in their perspective, their sister and their sister's honor and the family's honor had been violated, and they craft this incredibly devious and cruel plan where they deceive the town of Shem, or the people, Shem and his father Hamor, into saying, okay, fine, we will let you marry with our sister, but you have to be circumcised, because it is part of our covenant that our men are all circumcised. So the men get circumcised on the 3rd day, which we know is the weakest day. Shimon and Levi, and perhaps the rest of the brothers, they go in and they slaughter the men of the town, like in cold blood. And Yaakov is furious with them. He says, you have made me a disgrace in the land, and now their tribe are going to come and they're going to avenge blood, right? The Goel Hadam, the concept of avenging an quote-unquote innocent death. They are going to come avenge us. I'm going to be a disgrace. There's going to be a civil war, and we're done for. And Shimon and Levi say back to him, and this is where it ends, would you have our sister defiled as a prostitute? And it's a standoff. So you can, and we're going to come back to this violence and zealousness and loyalty. But this is why the Midrash then jumps to the conclusion that these two people are Shimon and Levi. This is also why, fast forward to chapter 41, Mem Aleph, that Yosef specifically chooses Shimon to leave in jail. Okay, that, and this is, there's a theory out there that Yosef was dropping hint after hint after hint after hint after hint after hint of, hi guys, I know you, you should know who I am, look closely, follow the dotted line, and you know, that's a whole different shear, but that's in the text, and then by the time we're going to talk about Yehuda, when he lashes into Yosef, or what looks like it, it's actually, he's really lashing into Yosef, and it seems clear from the text there that he knows darn well who this is, and basically he's saying, okay, we're done playing games here. It's very tense. Anyway, so we've got Shimon and Levi with this history of violence, who are very capable of murder. So when it says that they plotted to kill, this is not just idle talk, right? And then in the next pasuk they say, you know, and we'll see what happens with his dream. So that's your tet, and then Reuven steps in. Okay, so this is, remember Reuven, the stepper inner, right? We've already established back in Perek Lamed that Reuven steps in. We didn't really look at the episode in Perek Lamed Hey in chapter 35, where after Rachel dies, and after Rachel dies, that there's this incident. It's chapter 35, verse 20, 21, something like that. Kaf Aleph, Kaf Bet, Kaf Hey, maybe, if you guys want to flip really quickly. That Rachel dies, and then, you know, Rachel dies, Binyamin is born, they travel, and they finally get to wherever they're going to get to, and then there's this one pasuk, I think it's Kaf Aleph, if not Kaf Bet, Vayishkav Reuven et Bilha Eshet Aviv, it's Perek Lamed Hey, chapter 35, I think it's pasuk Kaf Aleph or Kaf Bet. This is what I teach. Okay, so this is like really weird, this incident, because it seems that Reuven has slept with his father's concubine, aka his father's wife. So on a very basic level, it's Gilui Arayot, it's adulterous. On a much deeper level, it's incredibly insulting, and an overstepping of bounds. But the weirdest part of it is the end of the pasuk, where it just says Vayishma Yisrael, that Israel, meaning Yaakov, heard, but he doesn't say anything. So this discrepancy of, if Reuven did something that was so heinous, why didn't Yaakov step in? So either he's given up by now, like, oh my God, you know, Shimon and Levi have, you know, raped and killed 300 people. Reuven sleeps with my wife. I'm done. Just give up and go home. But the Midrash here comes in, and it's a very, very famous, it's actually quoted in the Gemara, it's not just in the Midrash. There are two episodes that the Gemara brings down and says, Kol ha'omer ex chata eno ela toeh. Anyone who says that this person has sinned is mistaken, and those two people are Reuven and David. Okay, and what the Gemara there goes on to say is what is recorded in the text cannot be understood on its simple level, neither David and Bathsheba, nor Reuven and Bilhah. Okay? So the way the Gemara and Rashi brings this down is that Reuven did not actually sleep with her. Rather, when Rachel died, Yaakov moved his bed from Rachel's tent into Bilhah's tent. Right? Bilhah is Rachel's maidservant. And Reuven was indignant. And he says, her whole life, my mother had to play second fiddle to her sister, to her, and the Medrash uses the word Tzara, her nemesis. Now she's going to play second fiddle to her sister's maidservant. So he takes Yaakov's bed, he moves it from Bilhah's tent, and he puts it in Leah's tent. And what's really interesting is that in some of the opinions say that when it says Vayishma Yisrael, it means Yaakov realized that Reuven was right and he was wrong. Which is why he doesn't chastise him. And even when he gives him the bracha for being the Bechor, he says to him, Pachas kamayim al totar ki alita mishkavei avicha. You were quick like water. We know that water is a very positive image, but it's an ambiguous one. Here, you were quick like water, so al totar, don't do this anymore. Why? Ki alita mishkavei avicha, because you took your father's bed, az chilalta, you defiled it, yitzui Allah. It was as if you went on the bed. And that's what the Medrash says, the Gemara says, that what Reuven did was such a violation of boundaries of Yaakov's private life. The Torah considers it as if he had actually physically had sexual relations with Bilhah. So poor Reuven, he really wants to help. This is Reuven. He wants to help. His heart is kind of in the right place. And once again, we get to Sukkim Kaf Aleph and Kaf Bet, and if you can read them for us, that would be great. We're back in Lamed Zayin, right.
וישמע ראובן ויצילהו מידם ויאמר לו נקנו נפש.
Right. So that Reuven heard, he kind of understood that the brothers really were plotting to kill him. They were serious this time. Vayatzilei miadam, and he does save him, and he says, Lo nakenu nefesh. Let's not commit murder. Very kind of vaguely and amorphously. Go ahead.
ויאמר עליהם ראובן אל תשפכו דם השליכו אותו אל הבור הזה אשר במדבר ויד אל תשלחו בו.
Okay, so and Reuven says to them, don't spill blood. Again, the language is not personal, it's very general. Rather, let's throw him into the pit, and therefore blood won't be on our hands, okay? Marcia, I know you do real estate law, but can you remember back to the day, can you define the difference between homicide and manslaughter?
Sure. Well, you mean murder. Everything is homicide.
Fine, murder and manslaughter.
Murder is intent, and manslaughter is without intent.
Okay, so, and then the brothers knew this law also, and what Reuven is saying is, we're going to throw him in this pit, and he'll die. But we're not going to be guilty of murder. Right? Because he's going to die because he's going to starve, or he's going to, die of thirst, or some snake or scorpion or whatever poisonous animal is going to get him. And these were very, very deep pits. He's not going to be able to climb out. And, so Reuven is the lawyer here. And the Ramban explains that Reuven, once again, is trying to be helpful. Why? The first thing he says to the brothers is, let's not kill anybody. But then in the next pasuk it says, Vayomer again, right? So clearly there was a break, and now there's a continuation in the conversation. When Reuven saw that he was not successful in, preventing them, and then they're still like, kill him, kill him, kill him, he's like, okay. So instead, let's throw him in the pit, he'll die, everybody wins, right? We can't be accused of murder, we can't be tried for murder, and he's dead, and everybody's happy. We're done. Now, what he doesn't do is the obvious, which is, I am the firstborn, I am the head of this family. You will not kill Yosef. The end. He can never take that step. His heart is in the right place. And then later, in Perek Mem Aleph, when they get to Egypt, right, and Yosef throws them all in jail at first to freak the heck out of them very successfully. I think it's also in like Pasuk Kaf Aleph, Kaf Bet, somewhere there in the Kafs. Reuven says to the brothers, didn't I tell you not to hurt the boy? But you didn't listen to me. But what's is that back on the scene in Lamed Zayin, we don't hear him saying, don't hurt the boy. So either he didn't say it, and he's recreating it 22 years later, or he actually did say it, which is what the Ramban says, but effectively it's as if he didn't say it because nobody listened to him. So here's poor Reuven, head child, right? Oldest child. And he is not listened to. Who's the Reuven later in the Torah that we know of? There are 3 descendants of Reuven that we hear of in the Torah. Datan, Abiram, and On ben Pelet, who show up in the story of Korach. So if you fast forward to the book of Numbers, Sefer Bimidbar, Perek Tet Zayin, chapter 16, Pasuk Aleph, verse 1. And it says, Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kahat ben Levi ve'Datan ve'Abiram ve'on ben Pelet. Do you remember this? Yeah. Yay! Whoa! How about that? She remembers this, okay? So, this is the insurrection of Korach, right? The revolt against Moshe. And it's kind of a similar concept as with Yosef, right? Moshe, you're playing favorites. You made Aaron the Kohen. You made Elitzaphan, who's the child of the youngest of the 4 uncles, the Nasi. What about me? This is not fair. It's not fair you're playing favorites. It's a repeat of this, right? It's not an acknowledgement of God is choosing, and I'm just acting on his choice. But you're choosing. And so what Korach does is he gets together with Datan and Abiram from Reuven and mounts this insurrection. Now, at a certain level, they're right. They're right. It's not fair. Everybody was at Har Sinai. Everybody saw God. Everybody is called a holy nation. Why? And once upon a time, Reuven, that whole tribe of Reuven, as the firstborn, were designated to be the priests, because that's what happened was, right, the firstborn child and the whole firstborn tribe was supposed to be the priestly tribe. That all got messed up with Chet HaEgel, with the sin of the golden calf, which, parenthetically, according to the Ibn Ezra, is what immediately precipitated this rebellion. So once again you have Reuven coming along and mounting an argument that is not enough to be constructive, right? Don't hurt him. That's obviously a positive argument. And whereas Datan and Abiram come along and say, it's not fair, which is also, they're not wrong, but it's like he's perpetually going about things the wrong way. And that's where we leave Reuven. Reuven kind of disappears, and he never again attains this position of firstborn, nor does he attain this position of helper, kind of, and he's relegated. And I sometimes wonder if one of the reasons why Reuven asked to live on the other side of the Jordan right? Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh, is because he just kind of needed to get away. Like, could you just leave us alone? We're like this perpetual, misunderstood, misbegotten, to the point where their dialect developed differently. And it says in Sefer Shoftim that they pronounce the shin as a sin, so their dialects develop differently. It's like they're saying, you know what, go away, leave us alone. Like, we're out of here, we're done, goodbye. You know, so that's Reuven. Okay. So now let's look at Shimon and Levi and what happens to them, right? So Shimon gets thrown in jail. Then we have, right, Shimon and Yaakov curses Shimon and Levi. But then that same that there's a transformation that happens, a positive transformation, which is that through the experience of Egypt, and then finally through the sin of the golden calf, Levi emerges, and that zealousness for right and wrong crystallizes into an appropriate religious zealousness. In other words, there are two kinds of zealousness. One is where you avenge your sister and you murder 300 people in cold blood. The other is where God says, kill the sinners. This is a direct command from God. They go off, kill 3,600 people, and now all of a sudden become God's champions. Right? That line is really very thin, which is why the Mishnah says that we don't really tolerate zealousness. Zealousness is a very powerful and dangerous tool, because in the wrong hands it obviously leads much more to death than...
Ms. Kerr, could you please call extension 200, Ms. Kerr?
We know that one of the reasons that the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the second Beit HaMikdash, was because the zealots they helped turn in the Kohanim. There was bad blood.
But you'd think then they would be assigned a duty that would help them channel that.
They do. It's called service, the service in the Beit HaMikdash, except to the point that there's a story brought down in the Mishnah that they were so zealous that they literally would kill each other to remove the ashes from the Mizbeach the next morning. That's why they started, literally they had to set up a system of taking turns. That tribe of Levi was always zealous and passionate, and they were the religious fanatics, right? So most of the time that was vectored towards the service of God and therefore kept in check. But sometimes it wasn't, and sometimes they actually ended up turning on each other. But Shimon, on the other hand, never reforms. Not only does he never reform, Shimon flagrantly defies Moshe and God. In the 40th year in the desert, Korach is either the first or the second, depending on how you read it, right? Because it's the prince of the tribe of Shimon who's the one who publicly commits a sexual act with the Midianite prostitute. And if you don't believe me, look in the text. That's not Medrash. It's literally out there. It's the end of Parshanut. I don't remember exactly what parent. And that's the final straw for Shimon. Shimon disappears. Shimon, that kind of passion is so unacceptable that he doesn't get his own section of Eretz Yisrael. That Shimon is divided, and half of him is with Shevet Dan, which is the far northern edge, and half of him is with Shevet Reuven. Because only Shevet Reuven was seen as having the both physical and moral strength to keep Shimon in check. It's possible all of us that call ourselves Yisraelim actually have Shimon DNA. Interesting thought. Okay? So, we've taken care of Reuven, we've taken care of Shimon, we've taken care of Levi. Okay, Yehuda. Yehuda's an interesting character. So, back to chapter 37. Reuven says, let's throw him in a pit. They throw him into a pit. And they sit down and they have lunch. Verse 25, Pasuk Kaf He. Okay? We have a volunteer to read Kaf He, Kaf Up, Kaf Zayin, Kaf Het. It's 4 Pasuk. Somebody volunteer. Thank you, honey. Okay.
So starting from
Kaf
Kate.
He, right, 25.
Eliana's after, since Mrs. Vita for a minute, Eliana's after.
וישיבו לאכול לחם ויישאו עיניהם ויראו והנה אורחת ישמעאלים בא מגלעד ומגמליהם נוסעים לכות בצרי והולכים להוריד מצרימה. ויאמר יהודה אל אחיו מה הבצע כי נהרוג את אחינו וכיסינו את דמו. לכו ונמכרו לישמעאלים וידענו אל תהי בו כי אחינו בשרנו הוא וישמעו אחיו. ויעברו אנשים מדנים סוחרים וימשיכו ויעלו את יוסף מן הבור וימכרו את יוסף לישמעאלים ב20 כסף ויבואו את יוסף מצרימה.
Thank you. Okay, so they throw him in the pit and they sit down to eat lunch, and it's a debate whether were they near, were they far, whatever. But in any case, while they're eating, they look up and they see the hairy band of Ishmaelites. They see a band of Ishmaelim. They see these camels. I don't know why this guy said that there were no camels in the Middle East like a year or two ago, but whatever. Anyway, sees a bunch of camels, sees a camel caravan, and there are commentaries about, how they knew what they were, but the bottom line is that these people were on a royal road. There was this royal road, which was kind of like an southern extension of the Silk Road that went from China, which is where Lot is lotus, okay, went from China, India, then kind of across the, whatever that is, the Indian Ocean, not the Indian Ocean, whatever, the Bay of Bengal, across then picks up in northern Saudi Arabia, cuts across the Arabian Desert, cuts across southern Israel, northern Sinai, and ends up in Egypt. Like, this is well known. So they realized, they're on the equivalent of I-95. So it's like, and Yehuda's like, I have an idea. And Yehuda says, we have to listen to what he says very carefully. He says, Ma betza, what do we gain, right? Literally, what do we gain by killing our brother, right? And then also having to cover up. So it says, let's sell him. And then, ki achenu bisar, what is it? Ki achenu bisarenu hu, right? So, while on the one hand, Yehuda sounds incredibly cold and pathological, right? He's the one who is willing to say, this is our brother. Reuven doesn't say it. He's willing to stick his neck out there and say, okay, guys, here's the bottom line. We hate him. We want him dead. We don't need him dead. We just need him gone. So let's get him gone because he's our brother. This way we're not killing him. We're never going to hear from him again. The people who are going to buy him, we're never going to see again because they're these random trader, truckers on I-95. And we end up 20 shekels richer. Cool. Win-win for everybody. And then at the end it says, and they listen to him. So there's something about Yehuda that he already at this moment has the authority that Reuven doesn't. He is able to stop Shimon and Levi from killing him and override Reuven. Now, the big unanswered question is, was Reuven here for this conversation? And that's a subject of great debate amongst the commentaries, because if he was there, why didn't he say anything? And then there's another opinion that at this point he had left the scene because he was so upset, so he wasn't there, and this discussion was going on amongst the 9 of them. without Reuven. But Reuven has been marginalized at this point. So they do. They sell Yosef. And then in the very next chapter, which is chapter 38, we have the famous story of Yehuda and Tamar. Yehuda and his daughter-in-law. And, again, that could take us 3 weeks just to go through that. But again, to cut a long story short, whether you go according to Rashi's opinion, which is that Yehuda deceived his daughter-in-law, and in sending her home to wait, he never had any intention of letting her do a levirate marriage with his youngest child. Or you go according to the Ramban, which is saying that he actually did have good intentions, and he wanted just to give time for this kid to grow up so that he wouldn't do the same narcissistic stupidity that his brothers did that got them killed by God. But in any case, Yehuda has relations with a woman who's not his wife, and to all evidence seems like she's a prostitute. So you can't, again, the text says this, right? That he thought she was a prostitute. Vayachshaveha lizona. It says, Perek Lamed chapter 38, Pasuk Tetvav, verse 15, maybe it's verse 16, right? He saw this woman, he thought she was a prostitute. He said, come have relations with me. She does. Great, wonderful. Now, he's an honest guy. He gives her a collateral, and then he sends her payment. The text goes to great pains to show that this is a man who is, in terms of his business, right? Let's sell him for 20 shekel. I'm going to give you collateral. I'm going to send you your goat. He sends the goat. They can't find her. And he's like, forget it. Let her keep the collateral. I'm not going to make a laughingstock out of myself, but she's entitled to her money. She provided a service. She gets paid for said service. And then it comes out, no pun intended, that this Tamar, his daughter-in-law, is pregnant, right? She doesn't confront him directly. Rather, she says, with a messenger, this is later in chapter 38, I think like around Pasuk Kafhe, verse 25, says, the owner of these objects is the father of my child, right? Now, let's put this in a soap opera, right? The owner of this geometry book, right? You open the geometry book. Nope. Not me. Not mine. Would anybody have known the difference? And what would have been with Tamar?
Beheaded.
Burned. So she'd be dead. It's like a mafia, right? The one witness is now dead. Yehuda, upstanding son of Jacob, businessman, entrepreneur, pillar of the community, is off the hook, and nobody knows. So he's got a split-second decision to make in front of the whole shoal, right? And he opens, and he's like, oh. And there's like a pause, because the text says as he recognizes it, and then he speaks, and he says the words "tzad kamimeni," which is debatable what it means, but basically it means she's right. She's right. She was not a prostitute. I'm the father of the child. She did the right thing. I was wrong, whatever I was wrong for. At that moment, Yehuda is transformed in a way that Reuven and Shimon and even Levi are never completely transformed, because he steps up and he says, I made a mistake. I am taking responsibility. And then we see this again with Nachshon. stepping, put into the Medrash, him being the first one to go into the Yam Suf, but we also see this with Kalev. He also is the one, the only one, when the spies come back in Bamidbar, Parak Yud Gimel, chapter 13. We don't hear from Yehoshua. We only hear Kalev. And Kalev also takes that stand of, okay, you know what? Yeah, Israel is a scary place. They have arms, right? The Philistines have iron weapons, and the Arameans in the north have iron weapons. We don't have any iron weapons. It's a scary place. They're right. It's a really big, scary place. But you know what? We can do this. That ability to acknowledge the ambiguity of a situation, the ability to say, they're right, I'm wrong, or they're right, but there's another perspective. That flexibility of thinking, that willingness to put yourself in somebody else's place. That's what sets Yehuda apart. And that's why, and on top of it, right, he's lost 2 of his own children. So when it comes time to who's going to be responsible for Binyamin, that's Yaakov trusts him. Number 1, because he knows what it's like to lose a child. But number 2, because he knows what it means to be wrong and to be vulnerable and to own it and to step into it and to move beyond it. It's like Dr. Cohen, one of our guidance counselors, used the following. It's like expression. It's like, where you are is a place. It's not who you are. So Yehuda was in a place. He was in a place where he had to acknowledge and take responsibility and perhaps shame. It wasn't who he was. Who he was somebody who could rise beyond that and take responsibility. So we see this with Tamar. We see this with Binyamin. And again, I would tell you, if you read the conversation, the words that he says to Yosef, as a director, you could really direct this scene as dripping with sarcasm and dripping with double entendre and kind of that eye-to-eye lock of, I know who you are, and I know that you know who I am, and I know that you know that I know who you are. So mano a mano, we're going to have this out right now. Because how dare you? Not the subservient, oh no, not me, that we see in the movie. It's a much more tense, as I kind of imagine it as the, what was the army, you can't handle the truth? What was that movie? Thank you, right? That those, like those really tense courtroom scenes where they're like, somebody's gonna cave and you just don't know who it is. So that's Yehuda. And Yehuda, after the Midbar, actually what's interesting is he doesn't emerge again until David HaMelech, right? He's not the first king. He's not. There's one shofet from Shevet Yehuda, Otniel ben Kenaz, who is Kaleb's brother-in-law, son-in-law, something like that. I don't remember what. But he kind of goes under, but clearly he is the economic powerhouse. Beit Lechem and Hebron are major political centers in Israel. Yehuda emerges very much as the economically dominant tribe, and then eventually emerges as the politically and militarily dominant tribe. Okay, so now let's just, for the last 5 minutes or so, look at Yosef. Yosef is an interesting character, and he's interesting because his trajectory is solitary rather than really in relation to, and slow. His rise is meteoric, and his fall is tragic. So we meet Yosef when he's born, right? And Rachel, even his name is somewhat loaded, because on the one hand, we could read it as, you know, I want another child, or we could read it as, thank you, God, for having given me a child of my own. We're not sure how Rachel feels. Right? That's when he's born in chapter 30. The next time we meet Yosef, who's now the star of the show, in chapter 37, and he has these dreams, you know, he tattles on his brothers, he has these dreams, he seems to goad the brothers, and if you read the story carefully, he's not such an innocent victim. Okay? He's 17. Teaching 17-year-olds, they're stupid, but they're not that stupid, right? They know, you know, when somebody is annoyed with you, and you don't keep annoying the person who's annoyed with you, and if you do keep annoying the person who's annoying you, who's annoyed by you, then you kind of deserve what you get, right, honey?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yeah,
Working with middle schoolers last year too,
yeah. So there you go. Like,
13, 14-year-olds.
you know, and one thing I can say, and this is, I say this with total seriousness, one of the things that I love most about our students is that they never pick on the truly defenseless. So, like, if there's a girl in the class who, for whatever reason, really is clueless and doesn't realize how annoying her behavior is, either because she has some autistic spectrum disorder or whatever, she's never bothered. The ones they get angry with are the ones who should know better, right? Like, you're smart enough. You should know better. So they really do only pick on those their own size, which is
But
kind
he
of,
was absorbed in himself.
what?
He was absorbed.
Completely. Right? Playing with his, he was immature, according to the Medrash, he's playing with his hair, he's vain, you know, so he gets sold, he rises, he, you know, kind of redeems himself in Potiphar's house, and even there's a debate amongst the commentaries whether that scene between him and Potiphar's wife, whether he wanted to actually, or whether he was being so pure and righteous. And, you know, there's a lot of ambivalence in the Medrash at that point, because he's 18 years old and he's an 18-year-old male, and he sees an opportunity for advancement, and that word vayima'in, right, that in chapter 39 there's what's called a shalshelet. It's one of the notes, right? It only appears 4 times in the Torah, and it goes up and down 3 times, and the Mefarshim there and the Gemara points out is that that's his hesitation, right? Should I? And finds that, you know what, this is, he has a moment of inspiration. According to the Medrash, he sees his father's face in front of him, whatever you want to call it. He, you know, chooses whatever it is, the better part of valor. And then he gets into jail, and then once again there's a possibility where he could, you know, interpret dreams, ascribe something to God, be humble, not be humble. And in the middle of chapter 40, there's this very, very ambiguous verse when he's speaking to the butler and the baker after they have their dreams, and he says, do not dreams belong to God? Please tell me. So is he likening himself to God? Is he, you know, or is he saying, like, dreams belong to God, you have nothing to lose, please tell me. And again, the commentary is there to be. It's only after he finally gets out of jail, according to the Gemara 12 years later, and he comes before Paro, and one more time, this is his 3rd chance now, right? His 3rd chance. Reuven never quite gets it. Yehuda gets it on the first shot. This is his 3rd chance. And Paro says, I was told that you can interpret dreams. You're in front of Paro, right? This is, again, quite an opportunity. Yosef says one word. He says, Biladai. This has nothing to do with me. Elokim ya'aneh et shlo Paro. And there's a pause again in the trip. It is at the moment when Yosef recognizes God and God's omnipotence that Yosef can rise to the highest heights. It's the same thing with Yeravam ben Nevat, right? That the king who was the other guy, not the son of Shlomo. In learning about Jeroboam, whatever, Yeroboam, we often forget that this man was anointed by God. Only Saul and David were anointed directly by God. A prophet, Achiyah, comes to Yeroboam and says, you are going to be king, like Shmuel came to Shaul and like Shmuel came to David. So what the text is telling us is that this man is on the same level as Shaul and David. He's a tzaddik. He's a Talmid Chacham. And so God obviously picks him for a reason, right? He is worthy of being picked to be king over 10/12, 5/6 of Israel. And what happens is, again, he devolves back into the old Yosef. He becomes arrogant, he lets power go to his head, and it's downhill from there. And if you trace with the use of the name Ephraim, the son of Yosef, throughout Nevi'im Achronim, throughout the later prophets of Isaiah and the lesser prophets and Jeremiah, like, there's this such an ambivalent relationship that God has with Ephraim, because Ephraim is the beloved child, but the wayward child. And Yehuda is a little bit less beloved, but a lot more steadfast. He's kind of boring, but at the end of the day, he gets the job done, right? He does bad things, but at the end of the day, it's Yehuda that gets preserved, because Yehuda is the one of the brothers who steps up for another. Reuven tries and doesn't succeed. Shimon and Levi, their stepping up is by killing. Yosef's stepping up is solitary. Yehuda's stepping up is saying, okay, she's right, I'm wrong, or I'm going to defend Binyamin even if it means my own life. And that's the way Rabbi Israel explains it, and to some degree the way I understand it. That's the trait that's going to get us from here to there, is that, again, not only the loyalty to God, but the loyalty to each other. So just to wrap up, and this is from the end of Alex Israel's book, is that if you look in the prophecies of Messianic times, or of the future, is that Yehuda and Yosef are reunited, right? Mashiach ben Yosef inaugurates Mashiach ben David, but they're both Mashiach. That there's this concept that in these two brothers, in Leah being, the mother of Yehuda, and Rachel being the mother of Yosef, that, everything goes back to Yaakov. Yaakov himself is almost a dichotomous kind of individual, not just because he's a twin, right? But because he has this deceptive side, and yet he's considered an Ish Tam. And that basically that what the ideal, what's supposed to happen is from, let's say, Abraham, who is the one, and then already by the time we get to Yitzchak, it's splitting, and more and more and more and more and more, to the point where they literally almost want to kill each other. They do want to kill each other. That with Ephraim and Yehuda, and that's to some degree why the Beit HaMikdash is placed where it is, kind of centrally located in the country, that at the end, the goal is for everybody to come back together.